What's the most unexpectedly profound piece of advice you've ever received? I get overwhelmed thinking about the decisions in my life that have led me to where I am. I think it stems from me being very happy and very grateful and very anxious that there was a chance my life couldn't look the way it does because of a decision I made. I was telling this to a friend and she basically said, think of it as a subway. You might miss your train home, but there's always another one to take you there. It might not mean much to a lot of people, but it really helps me when I'm getting overwhelmed and just think to myself, there's always another train. It's okay. Don't ask a question that you don't want the answer to. Also, Roman Stoicism has a fucking ton of great ways to think about life, problems, etc. authors from 2000 years ago, and it's still poignant and relevant. The main idea is that you can't control what happens, but you can control how you feel about what happens. But when you get further and there's endless pearls of wisdom. The obstacle is the way really sticks out as one. And one philosopher said in response to hearing someone talking shit about him, he only says it because he's unaware of all my other faults. My therapist saw through my bullshit that I had convinced myself of. I would let relatively minor things fuck up my entire week. In session one day, I was expressing that my day had sucked and whatnot, and he asked me, "Did you have a bad day? Or did you have a bad 5 minutes and then let that ruin an otherwise okay day?" Obviously it wasn't the some aha moment that instantly changed all of my thought processes, but it was something that he and I worked on over months towards letting that question be one of the first things I ask myself when something happens. Manners, kindness costs nothing. I'd heard it 1,000 times before while growing up, but at this point I was young and in a hyper-aggressive environment, when an older mate from work said it. I suddenly realized that I'd stopped asking for things politely, or even something as simple as saying, "please." It's so silly because he probably didn't even mean it in a deeply philosophical way. I'd probably just told him to help carry something, and not been nice about it, but for some reason it gave me an epiphany. "Thanks Stu, I'm a nicer person because of you." I read this excerpt from a fellow Redditor on a random post. This isn't the exact quote, but he said something like this. I read this from the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. Stop worrying about things that are in your control if they are in your control. Stop worrying about things that are out of control when it is out of your control. Not gonna lie, my entire life, all I do is worry about things I feel I'm in complete control of, and also of things I have absolutely no control over. Definitely made my life a bit more relaxed. In high school, I confided in a beloved teacher when I discovered my mom was against smoking behind my family's back. Something that greatly upset me. She told me a lot, but what really opened my eyes was adults are people, too. That was almost 20 years ago, but it stays with me. It's very hard to transition to an adult relationship with your parents, and we are raised to view certain people in certain positions as infallible or above us. It's something I still come back to in my mind, looking at other adults around me. You can't bottle everything up forever. Bottles have finite space and eventually they start leaking. Years after I heard that, I started having panic attacks. Well, I was having panic attacks before I heard that advice, but I didn't realize that they were panic attacks for another 3 years. But I did quickly realize that the cause of the panic attacks was deferred stress. And eventually the deferred stress hits all at once and suddenly I feel like I'm having a heart attack. You don't need to be ready to do stuff. Can't do it perfectly? Just do it. Doesn't fully understand what you're doing? Just do it. Most of the time getting it done okay and quickly is better than taking too much time to do it amazingly and understanding everything about it. You're not doing it 100 right the first time, nor the second, not the third, but you will get there. Focus on improving compared to your last try, not to other people's 1,748,384th try. I asked a weightlifter, Olympic weightlifting acquaintance of mine, how did you get so strong? And he simply said, just show up and do the best you can every day. Now this doesn't seem like much, but he had a really low IQ and was coached and handled by excellent coaches, and when he said this I could see something special about the words come from him. Now I try to show up and do the best I can every day. I remember it a dozen years later. A good friend that I worked with, who has since died, told me this gem one day. Imagine this coming from a husky guy in his mid-50s with long gray hair past his shoulders, a gray beard and low, gruff voice. The day you get married, get a jar. For the first year of your marriage, every time you have sex put a penny in the jar. After the first year of marriage, every time you have sex take a penny out of the jar. You'll never empty the jar. Bro. Why don't you just ask him? From a drunk frat bro who was listening to me explain how open relationships are common enough in relationships, and that he and I had explicitly said we liked open relationships, so it was hard for me to tell if the guy I was going on dates with was my boyfriend or not, because the obvious signs that he was used to no longer having sex with others weren't available to us. So decades ago in my world travels, a random Australian woman in a seedy bar once told me that the trick to a successful marriage is that both partners have to secretly believe they got the better end of the deal. Of course, each should do what they can here and there to keep the other deep down believing it. I've gotten 20 years of a damn good marriage so far out of that unexpectedly profound advice. Choose your friends wisely. Got told this by my headmaster after getting in trouble when I was 8. There's always somebody better than you. Got told this by my friend's dad. I wanted to be a pro soccer player but turned into musician instead. What I like about this is that it gets rid of any fear of other players being better and putting you off. You should concentrate on being the best that you can be. Stop focusing on someone else and focus on yourself. There are things you can control and things you cannot. You cannot control the weather, stop worrying about it. You can control what you wear, how you embrace yourself, prepare yourself, and how to face the weather. Another one my dad taught me is only deal with high interest women. Low mid interest aren't worth your time or energy. My shrink was an imbecile, and at one point it really sunk in that I was going to have to accept that anyone in a position to have his job was never going to be in a position to understand or empathize with what I am going through. The most clear and comprehensive facts that emerged from therapy is that if you can get away with it, you should feel fine about doing whatever you want. If you're worried that something will take too long, like completing a degree, think about how long you think it will take to get that done. That amount of time will pass whether you do it or not. Wouldn't it be better to have it done, than not? Do you want to spend 2 years thinking of getting that certification, or at the end of those 2 years proudly hang it on your wall? This applies to folks that are involved with safety-sensitive jobs. Like an air traffic controller, pilot, calmly but be ready with a plan B because you saw something no one else did. You saved the day if you were right. If not, yes, you were the guy that cried wolf and overreacted but everyone continued to be safe. Teddy Roosevelt: speak softly but carry a big stick. Mine is a little unusual. I had a bad relationship fail. It had been a great relationship until it suddenly wasn't. For those of you familiar with XKCD, for me wasteland is how I still feel, despite 16 years having passed. On my memorial eventually, many years from now, I will have it inscribed on my gravestone in Gaelic. Guess I'll keep walking. I, at 18, saw an assault at work and had to be questioned by police statement act. My boss suggested I should have said I saw nothing. 20 years later, just a few months ago, my elderly neighbors on either side of me are having a blue in my yard and both trying to involve me in telling the police to see me and the wife as witnesses. Yeah, we didn't see anything. I comment again, because it comes from a joke, but it basically comes down to a group of guys that always offered a kid 2 bills, then the kid would take the smaller one. Then, the kid tells one of the guys that if he had chosen the big bill right away, the game would have ended immediately. The advice was always get the smaller bill and play the long game. It's a bit of a meme thing now, but the YOLO before YOLO was a thing. Think it was originally from a song somewhere. Maybe. But life isn't a practice run. You don't get to reset or restart. You don't have 3 lives. It's one and done. Similar vibes and even more gut-punching. No one is laying on their deathbed wishing they'd spent more time at work. When we just found out my wife had stage 2 cancer during 2020 COVID. I was reeling, wondering how I was possibly going to be strong enough to do all the things needed. A dear friend looked me in my bleary eyes. She bluntly said, "You do not have a choice." It rang so true, became our marching orders as we slowly, steadily kicked cancer's ass. As a teen and struggling with dating girls through pure inexperiences, I always seemed to pick exactly the wrong girl to try and talk to. Smiley face. Friend of mine gave me a piece of advice that I've used many times since. If you go to a party, dance or any group, just spot the people who are looking at you and go talk to them. It's simple and it works. Thumbs up. During an especially low, isolated period of my life, I was struggling to make new friends and snap out of a depressing time. I asked my therapist how to make more friends and get people to like me. He said, try to be interested rather than interesting, and you'll see that as you learn about other people, they will learn about you, too. Good advice. At the end of high school, don't choose the occupation you'd like to have later and pick your academic career to facilitate that. Instead, choose a study you really like and you'll probably end up with a job you like. I am aware that the first approach works for some people, But I'm very happy with the result of the second method. For me, this is so cheesy, but see with your own eyes, hear with your own ears. I often ask myself if I have a certain opinion because of what I read here on the news, on social media, from friends, etc. Just a reminder that going to the source when you can is best. Things are often different or more nuanced than how they seem initially. Life is like a river on a boat. You can't see too far ahead, you don't know where the river of life will bend or turn. Sometimes you don't know where it'll go at all. Don't try to control where the river goes, you can't. There's only one thing you can control: your boat. I saw it on the Dragon Prince and it's surprisingly good when it comes to buying an expensive possession. I had been talking about spending $5,000 on an oscilloscope for my hobby. My boss asked me, "Are you in love with owning an oscilloscope, or the idea of owning an oscilloscope?" That really helped me to better analyze the reasons for my desires to buy something. Don't let your first thoughts be your last thoughts. This hits me so hard because it acknowledges the fallibility of our instincts and offers us a counter to them. Without denying the validity of our experiences, it shows us that improving our knowledge of the world. I think that's very helpful and optimistic. If someone you like doesn't like you back, respect that, and as hard as it is, let them go. If you truly care about them as you say you do, realize they said their happiness is without you. Trying to force a friendship or relationship with someone who doesn't like you back is now only about you, not them. My grandmother had a lot of wisdom that was always centered on money. Never lend money to friends or family that you can afford to give away because they may not pay you back and it will ruin your relationship. Never borrow if you can't afford to pay it back. Always save the good times for the bad.